Whether it's around the country or your town or county, decisions are being made every day that impact real people and real communities. Welcome to the Rural View, where we open the window for you to view Wisconsin farmers and rural residents and get a glimpse into the challenges they face.
Welcome to another episode of the Rural View podcast. I am co-host Amy Eckelberg, and I'm here with Jim.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Jim Wren. Good to see everybody.
Good to be here again. We're becoming veteran co-hosts together here. And today
I don't know about that.
We're going to claim to be veterans, Jim. That's what you do. You fake it till you make it. So we're going to introduce our guest here. We have Dani Heisler. Did I say that right?
You did.
All right. With DATCP. So Dani, I'm just going to toss it to you. Just let us know kind of who you are and what you do.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me this week. I'm excited to join with you guys. So I'm Dani Heisler. I work for the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, so DATCP. And I manage the Wisconsin Producer-Led Watershed Protection Grant Program, which it's another acronym and a long name. So we're just going to call that Producer-Led Program for the remainder of the call. So
tell us a little bit about what does that mean? So talk to us about those Producer-Led Watershed. What are those grant programs? Maybe a little history and how they even got started might be helpful.
Yeah. So the Producer-Led Grant Program is a program that's grassroots, farmer-led, that is a competitive grant program that focuses on localized, non-point source pollution abatement. So essentially, the program started 11 years ago. So through legislative action, it is state funded since 2016. And really, it empowers and funds and resources localized farmer groups to identify what their, maybe what their landscape level conservation-based challenges are and their solutions, right? We certainly know that, farmers have ample opportunities to recognize where there might be challenges and what they might want to get, fix or how they could remedy that. And so why not resource those that are on the ground level and really have insight and have ideas on what to do? So the grant is a competitive grant annually where each group can apply for up to $40,000 to use towards their conservation-based plan. That plan can include implementing conservation-based practices, so soft practices. The program doesn't fund any kind of hard dirt work type practices, but more focuses on like cover crops and no-till, low-till, low disturbance manure injection, perennial plantings, those kinds of soft practices. Groups are utilizing funding for practices. They're using it for education. So whether that's peer-to-peer mentorship or bringing in speakers to discuss a specific topic of interest or kind of timely concern. Or, we've had groups that have brought like national level speakers that kind of do a circuit throughout a number of the different groups. So those two pieces, and then also research and demonstration. We've really found that the backbone of the program and kind of the secret sauce, so to speak, is that peer-to-peer networking, right? Farmers, they're being innovative and exploratory, and they're trying things to see what the potential solutions are. And where the magic happens in the program is farmers talking to farmers. Simple, but it's really the magic that happens, and letting those farmers discuss, hey, we tried this and this worked. Hey, this didn't work, or let's go back to the field and try and figure it out together. And so really that's kind of the platform for the whole program is how do we make sure we get the resources to those local farmer groups to find their solutions.
Did you say how many there were, Dani?
No, I didn't. I didn't even tell the best part. So in 2016, we started with 12 groups. And through the 11 years, we grew to 52 active groups this year. And over the course of time, we've only lost 4 or 5 groups, which is really incredible, right? Like it speaks to just the vibrancy and the excitement of the program that groups are joining. Over the course of 11 years, the award amount has not remained remain as high. Of course, when you have, $1 million allocation and divided across 30 groups as now compared to 52 groups, unfortunately, the groups typically are getting less than what they did earlier on. But really, the ethos and the excitement of the program is wanting to continue to grow, add more groups, add farmer organizations in parts of the state where there aren't any, and just that mentorship and excitement from existing groups is really kind of bled over into those areas to encourage more growth. If we remain on the same kind of plane that we've had the last few years, we'll look at adding another 3 to 5 groups again this year, through their own development and kind of that farmer-led initiative and pairing with, local collaborators for support.
So do you see that dollar amount being able to be increased as you get more as going down the road? I mean, can we get that dollar amount up for funding?
Yeah, that of course would be the hope, right? In 2026, well, for 2025's funding cycle and 2026, we had about 1.7 million in requests with a $1 million budget. So of course we're in a really oversubscribed state, and that leaves us with some pretty difficult decision making to try and determine who and how. But really that budget is based on legislative decision. And so we encourage, groups and organizations that have, lobbying ability to really, have those discussions with local lawmakers to encourage that budget continue to raise. It has several times over the tenure of the program, but yeah, we're definitely in an oversubscribed state now.
And maybe it's something, obviously we at Farm Bureau, we help out, but maybe on an individual level, is there some ways that we can help out with that? I mean, other than talking to our legislators and local aspects of that to make that happen.
Yeah. We've seen some groups get really creative in ways to kind of engage their local lawmakers, whether it's inviting them to on-farm meetings, having them join some of these farmer, or panel discussions on farm meetings. They're really good about sharing out their specific conservation metrics. So annually, they do submit a report to the program that includes, acres of practices and types of practices. And so we're able to kind of equate that to phosphorus and sediment and carbon impacts. And so each of the groups have kind of those reports. We've seen some of them be able to share that out with local lawmakers saying, hey, this is what we're doing in our specific group's geography. We'd really love program support. So that seems to be the way that many of the groups have kind of started to directly engage lawmakers. But they're also doing more as far as building partnerships. So in some of the more unexpected or unpredicted areas where, some of these groups are partnering with like their local lake associations, maybe, where they're doing things like on the landscape, they're hosting boat tours for some of the, the lake neighbors, where they're able to look from the inside of the lake out to look at like cover crops and perennials on the landscape and what that means for lake quality. So really kind of building those relationships to increase, partners to have those funding discussions.
Can you talk a little bit about what motivates you? I mean, what makes you happy to go into DATCP every day?
Yeah. So we'll rewind a little bit. Prior to joining DATCP, I worked with a nonprofit that was landscape-based and really focused on surface water quality. And so there I started working with one producer-led group and then helped develop 3 more. So I had a pretty deep understanding of what the producer-led program's like. But we'll rewind all the way back. So I grew up beef farming in western Wisconsin. I grew up beef farming. My dad's side of the family is dairy farmers, and my mom's side of the family actually grew peppermint and spearmint. So I had kind of a pretty diverse understanding of, what ag looked like or could look like in Wisconsin. And 25 years ago, which is really hard to believe since I'm only 29, but 25 years ago, I learned how to graze. And I mean, not good managed grazing, but the kind where, I understood what, livestock movement meant, and I could pretty easily understand that, hey, we can increase, through managed grazing, we can increase stocking density, and more cows meant bigger calf crop. That meant more income for the farm, right? So some of those, like pieces that you kind of put together. But that was kind of my basics, and really kind of spurred my interest in just conservation practices, I guess, and how that has an impact on longevity of farms, right? And how that, definitely had an impact on my home farm, and, growing up doing that.
My question for you was going to be, is Wisconsin unique in this program? I think when we, thinking broad spectrum, I mean, we have state farm bureaus all over the country, and a lot of times we're hearing from them about quantity of water and the struggles that, especially out west, farmers are having in that regard. Here in our state, we have an abundance of water, and our farmers are really looking at just protecting that resource, and I think that does make us unique. Do you feel the same way? Do you think we are unique in that aspect, or is there other programs across the country that are like these?
Yeah, I really think, I mean, maybe I'm partial, right? But I think that we're really unique and just advanced in the approach that we take to some of the landscape level challenges. So Wisconsin is the first state in the country that has a state funded program that really is focused
Sure.
on farmer led initiatives for conservation based solutions, right? So we have that right away. And I think what makes us especially unique in that is that this really is a program that empowers farmers to identify the challenges and solve it themselves, right? And it's very different than kind of a typical top-down approach that is more structured and maybe has rigid outlines or expectations of, and we could use certain practices, for example, that cover crops need to be at a certain seeding date or seeding rate by date, and all the parameters in place and verification, where this program really is a really different shift and puts all of that decision making in those local farmers, hands, right? Where cover crops are, they're different in Dane County compared to Marathon County. And when they're planting and what they might be planting, based on, topographical needs and soil types and moisture and planting windows. So we really encourage the farmers to make those decisions, right? Like, what makes sense, and how do you want to implement it, and how do you want to ensure it happens, right? And I think that's kind of the nature of a competitive grant is, that innovation shines through. And farmers have come up with, these groups are great, they come up with some of the most amazing ways to just find opportunity to get practices on the landscape, learn from each other, and hold each other accountable, which, again, maybe I'm partial, but it seems to exceed other types of programs that, are more top down and regulatory. I'm always excited to kind of share that success.
Do you think that's probably the biggest challenge then with farmers?
Sorry, the big challenge?
The big is that one of the bigger challenges is them actually getting it started and from the top down and
Yeah, it can definitely, I think it's a challenge, both from a group getting established, but also the collaborator that works with them, just because it's really kind of a shift of how many of them are used to, either working with programs or,
the
just getting
grant
some of these
aspect,
practices.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
because it's a wide open palette of whatever they want to make it. Sometimes that's a little overwhelming. And it's like, well, where do you even start?
Right.
And fortunately, with 52 groups now on the landscape, they're really quick to offer mentorship and help and say, hey, let me give you some ideas. This is how we got our group started. And we focused on practices for the first 2 or 3 years. And, we change out farmer leaders every 3 years, and, just all the different best management practices that help each of these groups kind of launch and get some ideas of what's possible. I do think just over time, one of the greater challenges I think groups face is, how do they continue to grow? How do they,
Yeah.
capture the innovators and the early adopters, that tend to join the groups right away, that surround the excitement. But then you get to that point where, like, okay, maybe practices are fairly saturated in the area, but how do you get your middle adopters interested, at least willing to come to the meetings or have a conversation? So sometimes, that could cause a plateau with the groups, and maybe a little bit of, frustration, or, just not sure how to continue to approach that. But I think that, it's fairly natural progression as part of the program, and they keep finding ways to, whether they're utilizing research trials that they're doing on farms and being able to share out that data as ways to facilitate conversation with neighbors. They've got really creative and innovative in some of these meetings. And the topics, not just focused on practices on tillable ground, but also on, wooded land, or partnering with other organizations that have been able to help them kind of break down that challenge.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, that is very awesome. So if I think you're right in saying that sometimes I think it's overwhelming to start a group because I've heard some of our members be like, "Okay, we're trying to get this group started, and what does that look like?" So how do those groups come to be? I mean, I bet they're probably all a little bit different because that's just probably the easiest answer. But like, is it a group of farmers who are like, "Hey, we should do this," or is there somebody kind of encouraging that, whether it's you guys or someone locally, or how do they usually come to be?
Yeah, exactly right. It's different with every group since it is really intended, the backbone is that it's a farmer-led, farmer-driven program. We really want to see that the farmers are kind of they're identifying the need, right? Or an interest in the area. So it usually starts with a little bit of this, coffee shop, kind of thing of like, well, maybe we should, go to this neighboring group's meeting or try something like this and see what happens. And then if you start getting together and typically it's the conversation with maybe it's their regional extension educator that might be part of the conversation or their land conservation office that is next in conversation and just start to ask questions of how do we establish this? How do we get help? What do we do? And it's really kind of a community effort of, different partners and potential collaborators that all help kind of bring farmers together, find a space for them to meet, kind of the organizational component of things, but really let the farmers decide, right? And it is fun to watch the groups as they first start to aggregate because they know that there's some commonality, right? There's some common tie that brings them all together, but they haven't quite identified what it is. And so going through and just kind of asking them their why super cool. I mean, it's so enlightening and just hearing them share, why they'd want to be at a meeting like this or why they're interested in joining a group. And, the answers typically stem back to something family based, like wanting to try and, ensure
Yep.
farms are sustainable, and ensure that the land is productive and profitable for the next gen, just doing the right thing. It's really wholesome, great reasons why the groups are there. So that starts to kind of bubble out and it's pretty easy to help identify for them, with them what their goals could be.
I have one more follow-up question, and that is, what about different commodities? One of the best parts about Farm Bureau is that we have members of all different sizes, different commodities, types of farms. Do you see that reflected in watershed groups too, just because of Wisconsin's makeup, or is it predominantly certain commodities that are involved?
Yeah. Yeah. Part of, a little bit natural progression of the program is that we've really encouraged diversity in groups to be competitive, right? So groups are required to establish at least 5 farmers, but many of these groups exceed 20 and we have a couple that are 150 plus members.
Oh, wow.
So you see a lot of diversity in those groups, but it's not uncommon that even amongst that initial 5, you might see, a CAFO and a small farm, organic and conventional, specialty crops and dairy and row croppers all together. So, really, I think we look at that as a really healthy foundation to longevity and a sustainable group, knowing that if you can have that much diversity amongst, kind of your core members and understand and learn and find commonality, you're probably going to do pretty good in the long run. But, when we speak to the diversity of the program, there is, of course, our traditional row croppers and corn and beans and livestock, a couple groups that are really grazing focused, but with the diversity of Wisconsin crops grown, we also have a few that are more vegetable crop focused. One that is comprised of several cranberry growers, and we even have one developing now that includes a horseradish farm. So lots of diversity happening, and it's super fun to learn from.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, let's say I have 5 farmers or 10 farmers in a group and we want to do something. who do we, do we contact you? Do you come to like our first meeting? Is it, is there a guideline or how do we go about setting something up like that so that hopefully maybe at some point in time we can apply for the grant or look at other ways that we can start our own watershed in our area?
Yeah. Yeah, Jim, that's usually the kind of email that I get from a group that's just starting. Is like, we don't really know, but what do we do? And
Right.
so, you know, I am always happy to offer kind of that initial mentorship and joining the groups for their first few meetings. I try to kind of stay pretty high level and just generally the parameters of the programs and answer questions because I want them to develop as organically as possible and really what is the priorities for the groups. But typically, early we help connect. Either they've already started that conversation with a potential collaborator, which is a program requirement that each group work with a collaborator. That could be either Land Conservation Department, that can be UW Extension, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, or a conservation-based nonprofit organization.
Okay.
So they work together in partnership with one of those at least, and then everything kind of continues to grow from there. We've got some great documents that, if any of the groups get stuck in kind of that development stage or are a nice roadmap. Like I said, I'm always happy to help, offer a little mentorship. And I say I'm, happy to do the idea sharing. I just am not going to write your grant for you. So otherwise, it really is group kind of develops on kind of their own pace and their own way.
Well, I think, with that, I mean, feel free to give yourself a little shout out how you can get in contact with you. And,
Yeah.
that's what this is all about is we're trying to get more of that. And I guess on that same line is how can we as farmers or Farm Bureau do more to make, bring this out to the forefront and make this, bigger?
Yeah. Yeah. First, like, I really want to give Farm Bureau a big thank you and kudos. I know you all have done a tremendous job just continuing to promote the program. And there's a lot of cross pollination between Farm Bureau members and producer led members. And so I know that I can see the effort on the landscape and where there's new groups kind of popping up and seeing that support and backing from Farm Bureau. So thank you. It's really evident, and it's just nice to have that leadership and just recognition of the diversity of the groups on the landscape and what that means for the overall health of all ag-based organizations. So yeah, it's of course you can always find the producer-led program on the DATCP website. There's more information about the grant, the request for proposals, which is really the roadmap to the grant and what's eligible, what isn't eligible, my contact information. And you can also see an interactive map of the groups that are all out there currently. So
Oh,
where they're
nice.
located, kind of their space, their size, and what their specialties are. So it's kind of a nice idea sharing and just way to learn about what's possible too.
Right, and I think, some farmers would be more than happy to go, if they saw that the meeting up in, the county to the north of them or the east or whatever. Hey, let's take a ride up and sit in on their meeting. I'm sure all these other groups would be happy to have somebody come in and they're, as you said before, they're happy to share with what's been done or, ins and
Yeah.
outs of starting a program.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think that's one of the special things about this program is the groups that are existing they find a lot of enjoyment and take a lot of pride in helping new groups develop and sharing what they're doing. I think when the program established, a lot of the conversation of like peer-to-peer mentorship was maybe within groups, right? And just farmer to farmer in a localized area sharing what they're learning and working together. But we're seeing as the program continues to grow and mature, that groups are saying, but we want to do more collaboration across groups. And how do we work together regionally? And how do we help, either mentor other groups or, work on content specific areas or get new groups established? So it's a testament to kind of that social science component of the program. I always tell people, I'm like, it looks like a hard science of what's happening here, but it's really a social science program, and just watching the farmer to farmer interaction and that be the backbone of, how there is landscape level change.
I think the farmer to farmer interaction is absolutely key. I think farmers learn best from each other, and I think when they can be the messengers and the encouragers, I mean that's the magic. I think you said the secret sauce. One question I had was just across the landscape too, like what do you see as those innovation components? You mentioned innovation earlier when you were answering a question, but like, initially cover crops is the big aha thing, right? And that was when it started. Like, where are we at now? We still probably have some people implementing cover crops. We have the early adapters and middle adapters and late adapters. Like we get that, but like across the board, like what does that new innovation look like in the sustainability space? I think I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. We continue to raise the bar on innovation and creativity, and some of these things are so advanced and really creative. But, I want to take it back to the foundation too, that, while groups are working on these innovative spaces, they're also still ensuring that they're laying out kind of that more beginner level, that entry level, so they are approachable, and that group, new farmer members are joining, right? So while we still so while we're seeing some really innovative things, we are still seeing, maybe single species covers or no-till, just kind of some our more foundational practices that are being heavily promoted by groups because they know that that's kind of the gateway, right? But, what's next? What's new? We have grazing. We have some grazing focus groups that, are working on how they can do electronic, collared grazing, right? And how they can utilize that as a technology to maybe partner with some of their row cropping neighbors to do late season grazing on crop residue. So there's options like that. We're seeing some groups that are really focused on, irrigation and manure management, studying more about 360 rain and how they can utilize that and in the whole practice. So, and then of course, there are wizards out there that are trying to come up with the most multi-species mix that works for their groups also. So there's a little bit of everything happening, but they all are, they're pushing the envelope as much as they can and raising the bar on innovation, including coming up with their own innovator type awards, for their groups. So not only the practices, but also rewarding those who are coming up with the creative ideas. It's super fun to watch what's next and the partnerships and the possibilities.
I think what's kind of cool and kind of resonates in my mind is just like Farm Bureau. It's a grassroots, and everybody in there, adding their and starting from the bottom and adding to it. I mean, it sounds awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, maybe one of the experiences I had prior to DATCP working with the nonprofit where we kind of took turns each month. A different farmer in the group hosted a meeting. And this particular meeting, I remember it was one of those farmers that was doing some pretty wild and innovative things, right? They were doing organic vegetable production, but they integrated cover crops into their cropping series and,
Sure.
kind of doing their own mixes and harvesting that. And, that was really interesting, kind of broke down some of those local cultural barriers of people that they think they know what their neighbor is doing, but then they get there and like, this is really cool. This is really neat, So we kind of break that down, but just the inclusiveness of the groups and just how inviting people are. We were actually packing up at the end of the meeting that evening. And before we even got to leave, I, heard my phone ding and got an email from one of the new young farmers that was there that night and said, "Hey, thanks so much for hosting this. This was great. I loved the meeting. I didn't feel like any of the questions I asked were awkward. People just welcomed me in. It's like, this is my thing. This is my space." I was like, yes, that's when we know we made it, right? Like that's
That's
the
what it's
step.
all about. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So
So one of the other questions I wanted to ask is, you have some really just some of the things you're thinking or like talking about that these farmers are working on is crazy because I did pay attention when this program started, and it's really crazy to see how advanced it's gotten. So like where does it go from here? Like with those really advanced farmers, like it's just like what are the goals for this program in the coming years? Like where do you hope to be in 3 to 5 years with this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that's one of the great questions that the farmers have also is like, how do we continue to demonstrate growth, right? Like we've been doing this for maybe, 8 or 10 years and, we've grown in terms of, farmer numbers and acres of involvement and partners and like how do we keep showing that we're growing and we're improving? There's only so many plants you can put in a cover crop mix, right? And so, we really are like, well, let's shift, right? And let's look at growth in a little bit different way. And let's talk about depth and capacity. Like, are you partnering with your local FFAs and bringing in, young people and maybe creating a regenerative ag SAE project? Are you partnering with, your Trout Unlimiteds or your Pheasant Forever type of groups to do some
Oh,
precision work?
nice. Yeah.
Or some shoreline groups, your lake groups. So all of those things, we've got some groups that, they attend their county fairs and they have like they put a little baggies of cover crop seed together that's really just more like, garden size cover amount of cover crops and, attach their little page on there that says, we're this group and we're promoting this. And on the flip side is like the seed tag. And, they pass those out at county fairs at their booths. So just finding different ways to just integrate in the community and really be sustainable. I think that when we look at what's next and how do we continue to demonstrate growth with the program, it's how do we become rooted there, and just the conservation is normal, right? Like that's the typical way of managing land is including conservation ag practices.
I love that. That is such an important component of these groups because they are doing some phenomenal work. And I think getting that, I mean, I'm in the communication space, sharing that story and making sure that the general consumer understands that it is so thoughtful of everything that they're doing to their land. And I think that is just something that everybody can help share that story because it's so important. And I'm really glad that they're kind of taking that next step. And that's where you guys are growing. That's really, really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super fun to watch. Thank you.
That sounds great. I mean, I didn't think about that with the county fairs or whatever. I mean, that would be an awesome place to do it. I mean, what place are you spreading? Obviously the seed, but not only you can twofold that and say, well, we're spreading seeds to grow this project and, create this project. So
Yeah.
that's neat to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely come up with some super creative ideas. I mean, and just the ability when we come together annual workshop and the groups are all together, the idea sharing and the conversation and the buzz. I mean, it's hard to even bring them back together for the sessions. You want to just be able to have a whole day of networking, but yeah, the ideas they're
When do you
wild.
do that? When
So
do you
we
do
get
that?
Yeah, we get together typically around the end of February. It's a annual workshop it truly is a work day. We offer it for all of the producer led groups. They are required to send at least one farmer and one collaborator, but many of the groups send several people. And, we have sessions throughout the day that are really focused on idea sharing of, maybe we'll have a centralized topic of soil health, for example. And there'll be 3 or 4 different groups that present on what they're doing. Maybe, how they're collecting data or, if they're using different soil health tests and how they're interpreting the data and what that means for their future goals. Or just, simply like what are some of the practices that they're doing. So we do, focus those sessions around, some of the science-based pieces, but then also the social pieces like, hosting events. And like, sometimes best practices or how do you recruit new people? There's an event that occurs through the Wisconsin River Basin that's now a traveling event each year. This is the 3rd year for it. And it started in Marathon County with the EPIC group and they hosted it. It's for all the groups within the Wisconsin River Basin and any citizens that are interested, just talking a little bit about what they do. And it's just been a traveling event. And so, the group in Sauk County, SWIG, they hosted it. And I believe this year it is headed to Columbia counties to the Lake Wisconsin group. So yeah, it's just kind of a fun opportunity to engage groups and continue to learn from each other.
Well, maybe you can get some new groups together and get a few more up there next February.
Yeah, yeah, that's the hope. That's the plan. I'm expecting a few new groups this year, so we'll see. I'm always hesitant to tell any names until we see them apply. So I'll tell you in January.
The element of surprise, right?
It is.
All right. Well,
Um,
I don't think I have any more questions for you, Dani. Do you have any more, Jim? Otherwise, we can jump into our quick fire.
Unless there's anything else, Danny, you want to get the word out on or tell us about before we give you the quick fires.
oh, I don't know. I mean, I am so excited to talk about all the great things that are happening, but just a couple things that maybe are worth sharing that when we talk about reports and numbers and the things that kind of resonate with people, based off our annual reports, and this we haven't compiled for 2025 yet, but we for 2024's data, I mean, we're at about 2,500 farmers and 1 million acres of ground that's involved in the program.
Wow.
In
Wow.
2024, they used around 700,000 of that $1 million grant to implement practices on the landscape, and farmers contributed a 4-to-1 out of pocket. So, I mean,
Wow.
that's incredible, but that also tells me
Yeah.
this is here, this is real, and these practices have a real stickability on the landscape. So, see that kind of dedication from that many farmers across the state that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
One of
All
my
right, I'm
first
ready for the quick
questions,
fire. Let's do it.
since you have a little bit of beef in your background, not to
Yeah.
get anything started here, but we have to know what your favorite breed is.
Oh gosh. All right. So purebred, I'm an Angus person through and through, but I'd probably tell you if I were still raising cattle, it'd be a crossbred of a couple different breeds. So, but yeah, that was my first purebred. We bought our first bull from the Platteville bull sale for
Oh, nice.
my parents' registered herd of cows, and yeah, my love is growing son for that breed. So.
All right. My question is, what is your favorite Wisconsin product?
No.
Well, that would be Angus beef.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many good ones. I mean, of course, my mind went to some of the specialty things different fruits and syrup and honey and all the things. So I don't know. I don't think I have one, but I'm going to have to say beef. I have to say beef. Like
That's
a
fair.
good old Wisconsin tenderloin. How about that?
That's a good
That's
default
fair.
answer for sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's always beer too.
Yeah, there is. I was going to say tequila, but I don't think we grow that here.
I think we have a couple Wisconsin distilleries that are giving it a whirl,
We
but
do.
not many. I don't think it's
Yeah.
a permanent thing yet.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a road tour.
I'm out if it's tequila, Jim. I'm sorry. I'm out.
Well, I'm game with you. So one of our other favorite questions, red or green tractors?
Oh, I have a blue one. Does that?
That counts
I
as
mean,
well.
all right. I mean, do I at least get extra points for having a tractor? I think
Yes.
Yeah.
You get bonus
right.
points for that.
All
You
right.
get bonus
All right.
points for that. Absolutely.
Fair. Well, we're just coming out of basketball season and we're heading into baseball. So what do you prefer, baseball or basketball?
Basketball, but I'd probably still pick hockey. You gotta be pretty excited for Wisconsin's hockey this year, right?
Yeah,
The
that's fair.
Final Four and the Frozen Four rather, and just fell a little
Yeah.
bit short. That was too bad.
Yep. Yep.
I like how you
But
don't like
still
to be
need to be
boxed in.
there.
Yes. Sorry, what was that, Amy?
I said I like how you don't like to be boxed in. Like you're like,
Yeah. Very traditional to my program. Yeah, I don't want rules. I'll make them.
I can relate to that a lot. I actually appreciate that. I don't do well with the quick fire either. So, all right. What is the best place in Wisconsin to visit?
I mean, okay,
No pressure
back
here.
to kind of a plug to the program, right? Is as I'm traveling around the state and visiting with some of these groups, they've got these hidden gems of places around, right?
Oh yeah.
Some of these restaurants that are farm to fork focused, or these cool wineries that are hid away in the hills, and just some of the most amazing local places that I mean, I can't tell all the secrets, but there's a lot of gems around the state. So
Absolutely.
That's
All right.
awesome.
I have the last one, I think, Jim, unless you have one to trump this, but I have a feeling I know what it's gonna be, but you can get pretty specific since we know you love beef. But what is the best thing to put on the grill in the summer?
It's definitely beef, but with a side of grilled seafood. So I'm all about like the shrimp skewers, and like I could probably just eat protein. We just throw vegetables in for color, but it's. But yeah, I'm all about a nice grilled meal as many months out of the year as we can make it happen. So
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
It's
I
about
could,
that
I
time.
could, yeah. Well, we did try grilling last night, but unfortunately, with all this lovely weather we've been having, I picked up my grill off of the ground last night, and
oh,
this morning I looked out and it's back on the ground again. So I might have to go and look for a new grill.
Yeah, I mean, one of these times you can probably find your own seafood with how much water we have floating around.
That's
Yeah,
no joke.
I'm thinking we're gonna have to start buying life jackets for all the seed we have to put in the ground.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's
It'll come
definitely
around.
Yep. Well, give it 2 months and we'll be complaining it's the opposite direction. So,
I know.
Yeah.
Farmers are never happy. Too wet, too dry, too hot,
yeah,
too cold. Yeah.
exactly.
But we always have that glass half full.
Always. Half full
Yeah.
of what? That is the question, but that is
Not
to be
tequila.
decided.
Not
Yeah,
tequila.
not tequila.
Maybe a Wisconsin old fashioned. How about that?
Yes, we can
Ooh,
all agree on that,
now
I
we're
think.
talking there. All right.
All
Well, I
right, well,
certainly
I think
appreciate all your insight on this today. I hope you get lots of people and questions and emails, and you get that program set up and moving forward. And let's hope that we can get a little bit more money your way and grants and stuff like that to get some more of these programs throughout the country, or the state, I
Yeah.
should say.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This is fun. I'm up for it anytime. I'll be prepared for a quick fire.
sounds good.
All right. We'll hold you to that.
If you are craving more sustainability stories, subscribe to Stewards, Wisconsin Farm Bureau's monthly e-newsletter for conservation-related news, trending topics, and upcoming events. Subscribe now at the link in our show notes.